Daniel Jones delivers in practice number 6 for the New York Giants, plus some thoughts on the offensive line and some takeaways from the 6th practice of Giants training camp. All that and more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and we are bringing you continuous coverage of the New York Giants summer training camp. Practice number 6 is in the books, and a lot to talk about on today's podcast. We're going to jump right in, and we're going to start off with our headline of the podcast, and that is Daniel has a day. That's right. Quarterback Daniel Jones in the 6th practice, of non-padded practice, mind you, had himself a heck of a day. Unofficially, Daniel Jones was 14 of 16. He did have 2 interceptions, both by Adoree Jackson, and he was, I believe, 4 of 5 on 3rd and long, with the 4 completions going for first downs. Now, just to back up a little bit, the focus of the practice was actually 3rd and long. That's what head coach Brian Daboll said the focus of the practice was going to be. So it was an opportunity for Daniel Jones and the offense to really get a good test, because think about it for a minute here. When it's usually 3rd and long, the advantage goes to the defense, but Daniel Jones had himself a practice, folks. I mean, for the most part, the decisions were on point. The accuracy was there. The reads, there were a few passes where you know, and I'm talking very few, maybe 2 or 3, where you can make a case that maybe he held the ball a little too long, or maybe, he would have gotten hit or something like that had there been live contact. But Daniel Jones finally stepping up and looking like he could potentially be, the starting quarterback on this team. Now, with that said, let me talk about why I'm cautiously optimistic and why I'm not putting a whole lot of stock into one practice. All right, let's talk about the optimism first. All right. After basically a week and plus of not really looking sharp, it was encouraging to see some of the offense come together, especially, like I said, 3rd and long, which is a very difficult scenario for any offense to do. And, Daniel Jones, you can kind of see that he's starting to take more chances with the ball. If it's a turnover, shake it off, go on to the next step or the next play. Not a whole lot of, what are you doing, dude? Type of scenarios. Those have seemed to have dissipated. Now, again, I have to say, this was due to a non-padded practice. Not that the quarterback is going to get hit if it's a padded practice, but the point being is when it's non-padded, there's not as much contact. So you do have to take it with a grain of salt. But that said, you could also say that the communication was good between the quarterback and the receivers. The receivers were getting to where they needed to be. They were seeing things the same way as the quarterback. So take that as a positive. The timing, Daniel, I think it's at sometimes still holds the ball a little too long while making a decision. And he's better when he can just quick drop back and get the ball out of his hands quickly. That's when he's really been at his best. Ask him to take a 5 or 7 step drop, and he has to look around and decide where to go with the ball. Sometimes he'll hold it a little too long, but overall, that was encouraging. Now, why am I concerned? I still think he needs to speed up the clock in his head, because again, not knowing, or I should say, knowing that you're not going to get hit, maybe gives a false sense of, okay, maybe, yeah, I see that defensive lineman in the backfield, but he can't touch me. So I've got a little extra time to connect with my receivers. That, I think that we've seen some of that, not just, on Tuesday, but we've seen it maybe in past practices. And it's one practice. All right. Eli Manning was the guest alumni speaker today. And Eli, I think, the speech that he gave to the Giants huddle fits the situation here. And basically he said, look, some of you had good practices today, but, it's one practice. You have to build on it. And for Daniel Jones, he's going to have to build on this good practice that he had. He's going to have to do it in the scrimmage. He's going to have to do it in the preseason games and in the games coming forward, because, you can look as good as you want, knowing that you're not going to get hit, that you're not going to get knocked on your butt. But once you become that sitting duck target, it's a whole nother ballgame. So the optimist and, the glass half full crowd is going to say that this was a step forward for Daniel Jones, and it was. The negative and the glass half empty crowd is going to say, well, it was one practice. It wasn't against live contact. And let's see what he does in a game scenario. So you decide what side of the fence you want to sit on. I tend to be optimistic. I'd like to think that Daniel's going to build on this, but we'll see. We'll see if he builds on it. The Giants certainly need him to build on it, because, if he could play like he did in practice today with, a little bit faster clock in his head going off, the Giants offense is going to be in really good shape moving forward. So that is our headline. Daniel delivers. So we'll see if he'll continue that. The Giants back with another padded practice on Wednesday. Then they have the day off on Thursday. And then the blue-white scrimmage is Friday night. So we'll have plenty of more opportunities to see Daniel Jones, and if he is finally over the hump, that basically that first week of training camp where he looked up and down. All right, coming up next, we have some thoughts from what we've seen so far in training camp. Some general thoughts are coming up next. That's right after this. Giant fans, this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life can be full of twists and turns that can really test our resolve. It's important to show up for yourself through it all. And if you need a little extra support, BetterHelp is standing by waiting to assist. BetterHelp Online Therapy assesses your needs based on your response and preferences to a short questionnaire and will match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. And if your initial therapist match isn't working for you, you can easily change therapists free of charge. This isn't a crisis line or self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And you can log into your account at any time to message out to your therapist. You don't have to go through life's up and downs by yourself. Let BetterHelp be there for you. And right now, get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. We're talking New York Giants training camp, the day of camp. Basically, in this next segment, I have some thoughts that I want to throw out at you. Basically, I have three thoughts in this segment I want to talk about. The first one has to do with the offensive line. And as everybody probably knows by now, John Feliciano has been sidelined since basically last Thursday, I want to say, with heat/hydration related issues. Now, Feliciano was back on Tuesday. He didn't practice, though. He just basically went through warm-ups, didn't practice. So Jamil Douglas and Ben Bredesen worked at center in his place. But I want to talk about the lineup that has had Shane Lemieux at center and Joshua Ezeudu at left guard. I really like that lineup. And, I've been saying probably for the longest time that backup center is a concern, and the future of the center position on this team is a concern. So after watching Shane Lemieux take some snaps there and Josh Ezeudu play left guard, it got me wondering if maybe, just maybe, that's the future of those particular spots. Remember, Feliciano is signed to 1 year. Left guard, right now Lemieux is the incumbent, if you will, the starter. But you just wonder if maybe the Giants are going to take a look at, Lemieux playing at center and say, you know what? We could work with him as our future center. Now, ideally, I still would like to see the Giants get a guy who has done it in college if I had my druthers, but I'm not paid to make that decision. That's obviously going to be a Brian Daboll, Joe Schoen decision. But I think if I had to live with, Shane Lemieux as the center moving forward and Joshua Ezeudu as the left guard, I could live with that. I really think I could live with that. So that's going to be a combination. I'm sure we'll see it in the scrimmage. We'll see it in the preseason. I'm very curious to see what that combination does against live competition, because so far it's looked very promising. And one last point about the offensive line that I want to just quick touch upon. Brian Daboll was asked if he's going to rotate guys, kind of like how Joe Judge did the 2 years he was here in regular season games. He would give certain guys a series here and there. Daboll basically said, during the preseason, yes, there's going to be a rotation, but ideally they want to find 5 guys that they can roll with. And boy, was that music to my ears, because look, an offensive line needs to build continuity and they need to build communication. And I get it. Sometimes you have injuries and sometimes a guy will have to miss time. But when you start moving guys in and out of the lineup at offensive line, you're asking for trouble. I never liked that approach by Judge. I know Belichick does it, but I never liked it. I mean, it's all about building continuity. And, you're going to have Glowinski for a couple of years. You've got Andrew Thomas and Evan Neal under contract. Shane Lemieux was under contract. Really, Joshua Ezeudu is going to be under contract. If that's your future offensive line, maybe just see what they have and stop with the rotating and, swapping guys in and out. But at the same time, I understand Brian Daboll's point that, you want to see who could step in the event of injury. So I have no problem with it during the summer. But once we get to the regular season, I'd like to see that unit stabilized. And I do think it will be stabilized. Okay, a couple of more points I want to make before we end this segment. Yesterday, Monday, Daboll spoke about having gone to players to ask them if they would take on expanded roles. And one such player, of course, was Kadarius Toney. He went to Kadarius Toney and asked him if he would take on an extra role in the offense. And Toney said he would. But Daboll never said what the role was. Well, I think, folks, we know what that role is now. Toney served as the Wildcat quarterback. And it's, look, it makes sense because Toney, I think, used to play quarterback at one point before he switched over to wide receiver. And, why not? Why not take advantage of these little skill sets and throw some trick plays and whatnot in there? I like the move. And even though Toney didn't necessarily throw the ball, it's an intriguing alignment. And I'm kind of curious to see what it would look like if Toney were to chuck a pass down the field. So I like that. The last point I want to make, and this is more of a media type of thing. Everybody wants to compare Daniel Jones to Josh Allen up in Buffalo and Josh Allen's path towards development. And the questions came to Brian Daboll again on Tuesday. And Brian, very politely said, look, I appreciate the question, but you can't compare. And you can't, folks. And I think it's maybe time that we kind of get off of that topic, because here's why you can't compare the situation. When Josh Allen first came to the Bills, he needed time to kind of grow into what they were asking him to do. He then went on to be in the same system for at least, I want to say 3-4 years. All right. This is where it varies with Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is basically starting from scratch in this new system, which is very different from the system they ran last year and is different from the system they ran when Pat Shurmur was here. So to expect Daniel Jones to have the type of, trajectory like Josh Allen had in Buffalo, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. I think what they have to do is they have to see how Daniel does in this first year in this offense. It's a new offense. It's not year 4 like it was up in Buffalo when Josh Allen started to really take off. See what you've got. And is there progress from day 1 to the last day of the season. That's what I think the team's going to be looking at. And I've said this many a times. You can't put numbers, you can't assign statistics to Daniel Jones's progress. You have to look at, is he making wise decisions? Is his mental processing speeding up? Is he winning you games instead of managing games? Those are all elements that I think they're going to be looking for. I don't think they're going to be looking for Pro Bowl or Super Bowl contenders or anything like that, like maybe, Buffalo would be looking for from Josh Allen. So I think it's maybe time that we stop with the comparisons and the questions. Oh, Brian, Josh Allen did A, B, C, and D. Well, what do you think Daniel Jones's chances are? Enough with that. Daniel's Daniel and Josh is Josh. And that's basically what Brian Daboll's message was to those questions. All right, coming up next, some remaining observations from training camp practice number 6. Stay with us. All right, Giant fans, we have more on today's Locked On Giants podcast, but first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head on over to BetOnline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the games start. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we are bringing you content as long as there's a Giants practice. And even if there's not a Giants practice, we will bring you content. Tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit about, we'll recap the day at camp on for Wednesday. Then we'll take a look at what our expectations are for the scrimmage. Then we'll recap the scrimmage. Probably take a day off somewhere along the line, and then Sunday back at it. So it never ends. And look, after the long off season, I'm happy to be back on the grind. And I hope you are enjoying the content here on Locked On Giants, as well as over on Giants Country, where we are trying to crank out content for you to enjoy. All right, in this final segment, I want to give you some non-quarterback observations from Tuesday's practice, which again was a non-padded practice. I mentioned Adoree Jackson had 2 interceptions, one of which was basically, I think it was just a bad throw by Daniel Jones. He threw it right to Adoree Jackson. And it was one of those, dude, what are you looking at type of throws. But the other interception, Adoree just kind of jumped the route, read it all the way, and came up with a pick. Adoree also had a couple of pass breakups in this practice. And it's interesting because he had spoken to the media on Monday, and one of the topics was, Adoree, you don't have a lot of interceptions to your name, pass breakups as you did it maybe in college. What are you doing to get more? And sure enough, it's like after airing out what he was going to do, he went out and he did it. So that was good to see. Adoree Jackson have such a big day. I think he was definitely one of the defensive stars of the game. Another defensive star of the game, Kayvon Thibodeaux. I like what I'm seeing from this kid. You look at young pass rushers, rookies in particular, and a lot of times when they rush the quarterback, they're just like wild, out of control colts out there. They don't have a pass rush plan. And you watch Thibodeaux and you say to yourself, this dude has a plan. And the plan that he puts in place, it varies obviously depending on who he's going up against, but it's getting him home. So now again, no pads, so you can't be as physical as you'd like to be. But even when they were in pads on Monday, he was beating his man. So I think Kayvon Thibodeaux is going to be a real pain in the butt to opposing offensive tackles. I mean, this young man has just really had a very good camp. You don't hear a lot about the wow plays, but he's making a bunch of little plays that are starting to add up and make you notice and say, wow. So good to see that happen as well. Darius Slayton, a guy who a lot of people think is on the bubble, had himself a really good day. He had multiple catches and he won contested catch situations, which is something we didn't really see a whole lot of from him. Slayton saw an increase in his reps. Kenny Galladay got a maintenance day, so he didn't participate in the team part of the practice. So Slayton got some first team reps and looked pretty good, folks. Now, I don't know if that's going to save his roster spot. Obviously at the end of the day, it's going to be determined by injuries, who's hurt and who's not. And speaking of injuries at receiver, Robert Foster took a shot in the corner of the end zone defending or trying to catch a ball against Adoree Jackson. And Foster had to be carted off the field. So I don't know if he had a concussion, just had the wind knocked out of him. I don't know exactly what happened, but he had to be helped up and he looked a little woozy. So I'm wondering if maybe it was a concussion. But anyway, injuries are going to obviously factor into whether or not Darius Slayton has an opportunity to make this team. I wouldn't say at this point that he's definitely a goner, that he's definitely going to get cut. At the same time, I'm not ready to put him on my 53. If I were to do a 53-man roster projection as of this point, not ready to do that just yet. Okay. One other thing I want to mention is the tight end situation. Now, this is kind of interesting. Daniel Bellinger in the spring was just absolutely dynamite, caught everything thrown his way. And I don't think we've seen a whole lot of passes go to the tight ends in camp this summer. And those that have, I don't think Bellinger has seen, a whole lot of targets. Now, I'm wondering, is that because, the Giants have been without Ricky Seals-Jones, who's nursing some kind of undisclosed injury, and maybe the Giants are asking Bellinger to do more blocking, or they want to see him do more blocking. I don't know the answer to that. But Bellinger, after a really impressive spring, kind of quieted off a little bit. He hasn't been horrible, but the opportunities I don't think have been there as much. Saquon Barkley and Matt Breida continue to look really good. Saquon in particular has looked explosive. Saquon blew past Tate Crowder on a pass reception. Saquon looks a little bit more decisive when running the ball. I'm not ready to say that he looks like the Saquon of 2018 yet, because again, I've got to see him in a game situation, but I've been encouraged by what I've seen from him. Matt Breida, I think if you've followed me a long time, you know that I like running backs who, when they get the ball in their hands, they make up their mind where they're going to go and they hit the hole. They don't, dilly-dally and dance. Matt Breida doesn't do that. So I have been liking the way he runs. Antonio Williams, I want to mention him real quick because on a play, he came up limp as well. He kind of hobbled and grabbed his, I don't remember which leg it was, but he grabbed his quad. So that's something to keep an eye on as well, because I think Antonio Williams was actually a little bit ahead of Jashawn Corbin in terms of, the competition for backup running back. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on, I guess, going forward. But overall, I would say, folks, the offense starting to come along. The defense, I'll tell you what, I like the variety of blitzes that defensive coordinator Wink Martindale has thrown at the offense. I like how, some of them have been floods. Some of them have been, throwing pressure at both sides and trying to overload. Just a lot of creativity. And along with that, you see creative alignments. You'll see, for example, 2 down linemen, 1 linebacker, and more defensive backs. So really like what I've seen from the defense. One final note before I forget, Dane Belton, the safety who has the broken collarbone, head coach Brian Daboll said that Belton will not need surgery, but Daboll was also unable to say for sure if Belton would be back in time for the start of the regular season. My gut feeling is maybe not, but we'll have to see. It's all going to depend on how quickly he heals. So, I don't know how bad his fracture is, but that's going to determine whether or not he's back or not. But it's good. It's a good sign that he doesn't need to have surgery, to have a screw inserted to help with the healing process. Because if he needed surgery, then you could have pretty much put him on the shelf for the first 6 weeks of the season. So, all right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you keep it here all week. We will have more updates from training camp. We'll be previewing the blue and white scrimmage on Friday night. We'll probably do that on Thursday's show. So a lot more coming your way. And don't forget also, check us out on Giants Country, where I have all my written work, as well as the written work of Coach Gene Clemens and the rest of the guys that are contributing over there, including Tommy G, who is doing his own little podcast for us over at Giants Country called Tommy's Takes. So you'll want to check that out as well. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. We will see you again tomorrow, Giant fans.